our viewers and listeners, if you could just give us the kind of 30,000-foot view of Isaiah, which I know is a tall ask, but you're the right guy to do it. So if you wouldn't mind just kind of walking us through, what do you think are the most important things to grasp about the book? Its structure, its historical setting. How do we make sense of it?
Yeah, if I could start with a historical setting, because it explains a lot about the book. Isaiah lived, circa, round ballpark numbers, ministered circa 750 to sometime shortly after the turn of the century to maybe 680 something, and that's a long ministry. And so his prophetic ministry spans about 50 years. That's a lot of room for diversity of topics, a lot of room for him to grow and morph in his own theological thinking, which helps to explain the diversity and complexity of the messages. If you took, I've been preaching for over 40 years, and if you took 40 years of sermons and cobbled them together, I mean, what's it going to look like? And well, if you have an organizing concept, that helps. And so for Isaiah, his ministry was primarily revolving around one of the first big earthquake crises to hit ancient Israel, and that was the Assyrian Empire that God used to bring covenant sanctions against the northern kingdom of Israel, and also to a large extent the southern kingdom of Judah as well. And so Isaiah is addressing what is happening to somewhat the northern kingdom, but especially the southern kingdom, Judah and Jerusalem, when the Assyrian Empire started to gobble up large chunks of other territories. And there's also the need, because the exile really began in Isaiah's lifetime. The Assyrian king Sennacherib said he took over 200,000 people into captivity. We usually think of the exile of Jerusalem, in 586,
the destruction of the temple
with Babylon, but really there were many, thousands and thousands of Judeans already in exile at the time of Isaiah. And so he's addressing a community that has experienced massive trauma. 46 fortified cities of King Hezekiah were destroyed by Sennacherib. And so everybody had family members who died and were taken into captivity. And think about that kind of trauma and the crisis. And Isaiah has a massive pastoral problem on his hands. So his message addresses people who are going into exile and trauma. That then lends itself nicely to the next big crisis about 100 years later that hits the people of God, when the Babylonian Empire, which was the big bully on the block then, came in and destroyed the southern kingdom and destroyed Jerusalem. And so Isaiah's messages then address more people in exile with more trauma. And the big question, how do we trust our covenant God when this has happened to us? Which is really a question for the ages, God's people suffering.
We call that theodicy today, right? Like kind of the problem of evil, but the particular kind of theodicy you see in really all the prophets is, we've done some bad things, but Lord, how can you use the worst of the worst to discipline us, right? Like the Assyrians they're horrible, right?
They skin people alive.
So like think about Jonah not wanting to go to these people. Like you understand it when you think about it in its context.
They're brutal. So the big question for Isaiah is, in the face of traumatic crisis, how do I continue to trust God? How do where do the people of God look for deliverance in the face of that kind of trauma?
That's really helpful. And I think it helps us connect with the big picture of what Isaiah is up to, what the book is up to, right? We're talking about periods of trauma that really end up shaping the way our Old Testament reads, is put together, the identity of the Jewish people as we move towards the period of the New Testament. So these are like vital global incidents from the perspective of Israel that really impact the shape of their identity as the people of God, right? Yeah, that's helpful. What about at a literary level? What do you see going on in the
put the
book
together?
Yeah, I mean, we got 66 chapters here.
Yeah, if I can walk through it briefly, like you've heard me do, many times in the course of class, because I had always, you can't avoid Isaiah is so rich, rich and thick and wonderful. So, Isaiah, if you want to think in big chapter chunks, the first 6 chapters lay sort of a background, first 5 chapters in the judgment of God and the reasons for judgment that lead up to the call. Usually in a prophetic book, the call narrative, the description of the prophet's call, is the very first chapter.
Yeah, in Isaiah, you have to wait till chapter 6 to get the call of the prophet, right?
Yeah, why is that? Well, if you look at the commission that God gave Isaiah, he said, okay, Isaiah, I want you to go out there and I want you to preach to people who aren't going to hear, and their hearts will just be hardened. And so it's a bit like I use the analogy, with my students. Imagine that you're walking across the graduation platform and the president shakes your hand, hands you your diploma, and says, and by the way, congratulations, but your ministry is going to be a failure.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I know.
So that's a bit of the message Isaiah got. And the first 5 chapters help explain this odd message of hardening, because you have this theological introduction to the condition of the heart of the nation that's already kind of hardened, and so the first 6 chapters set that up. And then chapters 7 to 12, Isaiah is dealing with the prophet, with the king Ahaz, who is the prime classic example of someone whose heart is already hardened.
Yeah.
He's already made up his mind in terms of faith, and what's he going to do in the face of military crisis facing Jerusalem and the southern kingdom. And so 7 through 12 is the example of a person whose heart, he has already made an alliance with Assyria rather than turning to the Lord. He's made an alliance with a foreign power, and he says, so don't bother me, Isaiah, with signs or any of this kind of stuff. Well, Isaiah says,
I won't even test the Lord. I'm so holy.
Isaiah says, well, God's going to give you a sign anyway.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that. We got to talk about that.
Yes, okay. Okay. So this wonderful sign of a promised child. And so you get it's called the Book of Emmanuel, chapter 7 to 12, because it anticipates this child, who I would call messianic, as we finally see in the book, and the expectation for deliverance through the agency. And so Isaiah contributes in a big way among all the prophets by a focus on the agent of God's deliverance and God's kingdom. And we can talk more about that.
Yeah, let's do that. Yep.
And then chapters 13 to 27 are all of the oracles against the foreign nations. Well, how do they fit? Well, Ahaz has just shown the way not to do it, to trust a foreign nation. And so these chapters take it a step further and say, okay, let's run down the lineup of the foreign powers. They're all going to be judged. They're all going to fail. So Israel, Judah, Jerusalem, do not look to foreign political powers to deliver you, which is maybe a message that we can learn from today as well.
Don't put your hope in the wrong thing, the wrong sort of government. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so those are warnings to not trust, these national powers. And then chapters 28 to 35 focus in on the weakness of human leadership and the failure. Isaiah portrays Israel, Judah's leaders as a bunch of drunken, people who are staggering around and stumbling and falling over. And what reliability do you have in that? Well, none. And so again, they are being pressed by the prophet to turn to the Lord. And then you get a bridge section from chapters 36 to 39, where there's a shift from the court of King Ahaz to the court of his son Hezekiah, who's the next king. And Hezekiah normally is portrayed as he's a good king. He brought in a lot of reform to the worship of Israel, but the problem with Hezekiah is his heart grew proud, and he invited ambassadors from Babylon to see his treasures, because they were making an alliance against the Assyrians, who were the big, imperial bad guys. And because of that, judgment would fall on the royal dynasty of King David through Hezekiah. And the failure of, even though Jerusalem is delivered by the faith of Hezekiah, unlike the faithlessness of his father Ahaz, Hezekiah is more faithful, more loyal to the Lord, but this weakness and pride led to destruction. And so it opens the door to the Babylonians. Isaiah says, look, they've seen it. They've seen your treasures. The day's going to come when the Babylonians are going to come and rob the temples, or the temple and the treasures. So that bridges then into chapters 40 through the rest of the book, which is a focus on the Babylonian crisis. And God, brings a message of comfort to those who've been traumatized by exile, both from the Assyrian and now the Babylonian, conquest. And Isaiah preaches the creatorship of God. Ultimately, if God is creator, then he's able to deliver. Where do you turn in trauma for trust? Well, the most powerful, source in the universe is the creator of the universe. And so that's the portrayal of God in chapters 40 to 48. Then in 49 through 55, there's a shift to back to this promised agent of deliverance. And so we get these messages of what's called the suffering servant, who will show himself faithful. Israel, as the servant of God, fails to bring a light to the Gentile nations of salvation. And so God will raise up a servant who will do that. And so the section 40 to 48 on God as creator is the answer to Israel's political crisis, which is the foreign powers that are ganging up on them. God is more powerful. Nothing can stop his deliverance because he's creator. And then in 49 to 55, you get the solution to Israel's spiritual problem, which is their sin. And then 56 to 66 gives a portrayal of a solution to Israel's social problem, when God promises to bring justice and peace and order back to his people in a new creation. And that closes the book.
Yeah, that's great. And the book actually closing with images of a new restored creation that are then picked up in the New Testament as part of the vision.